Hi, if you read the title and saw my thumbnail and still clicked on this video, then chances are I don't need to spend too much time convincing you that all things woke turn to doo-doo. No, what we're here to talk about today is being able to explain why and why some Christians are defending aspects of woke culture. So, this means that in order to understand why they believe what they believe, we're going to trace their logic to understand their conclusions. Then we're going to see what the Bible has to say so we can form a biblical response for those conclusions. Now, I'm not trying to get all intellectual and we can all feel superior together. I mean, she, they, frog, self feels superior when she, they, frog, self explains to you she, they, frog, self's pronouns. My purpose for this video is that in this day and age, it's simply not good enough to hold a belief, but not be able to explain and articulate why. And if you don't learn how to examine belief systems and form sound conclusions, then there will come a day where you too could be deceived because you hear something that sounds so nice and something that you want to be true, if not for you, for someone you love. And you too will end up with a belief with no sound foundation. So remember this, the first step to not being deceived is to never think yourself incapable of being deceived. We need to trace all of our beliefs to their root, all of them, including your traditions and cultural practices, things that we've been doing simply because our mother and her mother before that have been doing. And if we find that one of those beliefs is not founded upon the word of God, it's time to let them go, even if it sounds nice. And that's the reason for this video, because I have heard too many Christians in Christian schools endorse wokeness like it's the third great awakening. Oh, there will be revival and we will see a great awakening, but wokeness is the counterfeit. So this video will be the first in a series of 4 videos where we will be going over Paulo Freire's manifesto titled Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Now, for those of you who don't know, Paulo Freire's ideology is the academic foundation of all things woke being taught in schools right now. He believes that the truest form of freedom is unbridled human expression and that the solution is communism. Yeah, we'll talk about it. In his book, Freire explains his beliefs and, most importantly, how to instill those beliefs through education, hence the title, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So we're going to go over this book chapter by chapter to examine those beliefs and expose his method for teaching it. And I'm telling you, once you know how to recognize it, it will shock you to see how much you are already surrounded by it. And hopefully, this will spark in you some ideas for what you can do to counteract it in your sphere of influence. And may you be all the more successful because you know where their pillars are that are holding up their ideological stronghold. So now, hang on to your glasses. We're about to dive into the pedagogy of the oppressed. Chapter 1, Freire lays down his justification for what he believes. He starts by explaining his premise that the core purpose of humanity is to become human. But Judy, you say, you can't define a word by the word itself? Yes, and that is exactly what he proceeds to do, and double down on, repeating the word human as if you are ridiculous for not understanding such a basic yet deeply profound concept. Do you not understand that to exist is to be, and in like manner to be human is to be human? Yes, he is actually that insufferable in tone for the whole book. But you know what? We're going to overlook it and accept his premise as is so as to follow through with his logic and see where it takes us, okay? So, back to the purpose of humanity. Freire says that the central problem of humankind is humanization, which is to affirm our identities as human beings. Being truly human means becoming more fully human through a process of humanization. And this process involves becoming more completely oneself, which is an ontological vocation. At least we know where Kamala gets her vocabulary from. Let me help him out. Yeah, what he's trying to say, in a very roundabout way, is that the purpose of humankind is to know thyself. So, if you ever cease your constant search for becoming more yourself, you cease to affirm your identity as a human being. And the way he argues this is that, well, if you ever stop acting like a human, you stop being fully human. And so how do you do that? How do you keep acting like a human? Through inquiry and praxis. Inquiry just means lots of introspection, and praxis means action and practice. So, through ongoing introspection and putting your thoughts to practice, you are engaging in the ongoing process of humanization. And it is in this constant process of humanization that you experience authentic liberation. So, his conclusion is that true freedom is to constantly try to know yourself more and then to be yourself. Well, I mean, that doesn't sound too bad now, does it? And he uses such nice big academic words, and he sounds so intelligent and nice. And if I can accept his conclusion, well, why can't I accept his premise? Being free to know yourself and be yourself sounds good and right. And it's not unreasonable to want to be yourself and want for others to be able to be themselves. And then you overlook that his entire argument is hinged on defining humanity as a process. And he is about to explain to you the only process by which you can still be considered human. I want to draw attention to this because it is so easy for decent folk who believe in free will and are more than happy to live and let live to gloss over all of that educated jargon and say, well, yeah, I don't want other people to enforce how I live, so of course I won't enforce how others live. I am created in the image of God. Everyone was created in the image of God. I'm a good, humble Christian who would never infringe upon someone else's free will, and then throw in a couple of imago Deis in your exposition to sound like you know what you're talking about. The problem with this is that you filled all that in yourself. Our minds like to fill in the blank, and because you are decent, you expect decency. Freire is not arguing that all humans have free will and freedom is your right to live peaceably without someone else's will infringing upon your right to life. Freire is arguing that freedom is unbridled human expression and human by his definition. See, most of us would probably define oppression as infringing upon someone else's free will, and that if you oppress others, you are behaving inhumanely. Freire would say that if you oppress others, you are unhuman. So now he's about to define for you what he means by oppression. And with that segue, let me explain the state of the world as he sees it. So cue his tragic backstory. You see, he has personally experienced desperate poverty, and that's caused him to come to the conclusion that the world is split up into two classes, the oppressor and the oppressed. You are either one or the other. And from the beginning of his book, he confidently declares this view reality based on his personal experiences. And I get the impression that he feels it's a waste of time to lay out his argument for this view. He basically references himself and his nation as proof and goes on about how obvious it is that clearly the world is divided into oppressors and oppressed. So, after all his soul searching on his traumatic experiences, he concludes that all of human history is a constant battle of humanization versus dehumanization. Or in other words, there's people trying to become more human, fighting against people trying to make you less human. So the solution is to help people realize that they are being oppressed. Then they will become a new being or reborn. And he also likes to use expressions like lifting the veil from their eyes. And so that's basically where we get the idea for woke, because people feel like they've awakened and see what they didn't see before. Anyways, he explains that this dynamic of humanization versus dehumanization comes from the oppressor class clashing with the oppressed class. So obviously, the oppressors are the dehumanizers and the oppressed are the humanizers. And this proves to him that the oppressor class is actively doing violence against the oppressed class just by existing. Whereas the oppressed have never initiated violence in all of human history because they are simply reacting to the violence being done to them, as in it's all self-defense. And any generosity from the oppressor class is just an act of hypocrisy, so they can maintain their position. And because of this system that the oppressors are actively maintaining, tensions will run high, and the oppressed will attack or do violence to each other. But that's only because they have internalized the values of the oppressor, and so they are attacking the oppressor that exists in their comrades. So when anyone who's oppressed shouts at or beats his family or drowns his sorrows by drinking, it's a natural reaction. It's only because he's not being allowed to be fully human. It follows then, he argues, that those who don't allow other people the right to their own humanity are semi-humans. Yes, that is his word. So remember, the end goal of humanity is to always be engaged in the process of being fully human. But the oppressors keep the oppressed from doing so at the cost of not being fully human themselves. So aren't you a good, decent Christian? Don't you believe that we live in a fallen and unjust world? Don't you empathize with the reality of extreme poverty? Haven't you been given the Great Commission? Of course, we must side with those who are oppressed. And again, you have filled in the blanks. And just like that, with a heart of good intentions, his words would move you to fight for the plight of the oppressed. And then you forget that his argument is hinged on accepting that there is a class of people that are semi-humans and another class of people that are fully justified no matter what they do. He claims that he's calling the oppressor class semi-humans out of love, that it's for their own good and the ultimate good of humankind. He argues that the oppressors are less than human, even if they don't know it. Even if they are generous, it's all a ploy to keep their positions of power because they cannot ever not be the oppressor. So now you see why every liberal seems to be desperately competing to see who is the greatest victim. You have to maintain your position of being an oppressed person or identify with an oppressed people group, even if it's through intersectionality, or you will find yourself in the oppressor class of semi-humans. So you see why it's okay to riot and burn down cities and call it mostly peaceful protests. And you see why it's okay to wish the worst to come upon people that you disagree with, because the world would be a better place without them, because they are not even considered human. And so you see why it's so important for them to infiltrate every subject in school with things like critical race theory or gender theory, because you must keep criticizing in order to liberate. And so obviously, those who are truly human know what's best for this world. And in this struggle for liberation, they begin to participate in the process of humanization and thus regain their humanity. And so continues this competition to see who's more oppressed and therefore more qualified to lead others to regain their humanity. So this idea leads us right into chapter 2, where he explains how to change the education system to amplify the voices of the oppressed. So that way they can teach the world what they need and then what the world must do to meet their needs, thus allowing all parties to engage in the process of humanization. You're welcome, they would say. They are bestowing upon you the opportunity to prove yourself human, even if you are an oppressor. And that's it for chapter 1. That's the foundation of his ideology. And this is why this generation will flaunt their shame proudly and confidently declare their victimhood, because if they can make you cater to them, you are helping yourself to become more human. And come back for chapter 2 if you want to know how to embed this ideology into impressionable minds. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please feel free to leave me questions or comments below. And don't forget to make like a Roman emperor and give me a thumbs up if you'd like me to survive the gladiatorial games that is the algorithm of YouTube.